Sharon asked if I was going to have a title, and I was just going to call it The Message, but then she said, oh no, you should come up with the title. So Grace and Independence is the title of our talk this morning. Renee Brown has provided us with a series of challenging and affirming books, each of which truly helps us to come to grips with the reality of modern daily life. The third book in her series, Rising Strong, actually could be subtitled, in the words of the vernacular, What Can I Do After I Screw Up? She writes, I knew when I was writing The Gifts and Daring Greatly that I would ultimately write a book about falling down. I've collected that data all along, and what I have learned about surviving has saved me again and again. It saved me, and in the process, it's changed me. So here's how I see the progression of my work. And you can see the title of her books just inside here, Wholehearted Living, just inside the bulletin. The Gifts of Independence can be summed up, be you. Daring Greatly, be all in. And then Rising Strong, fall, get up, and try again. The thread that runs through all three of these books is our yearning to live a wholehearted life. I define wholehearted living as engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. End of her quote. So what attacks our sense of worthiness? Our sense of unworthiness and feeling of inadequacy occurs largely because we feel we do not measure up to some immeasurable, mysterious standard. I am not a huge fan of the social sciences, but I think there are some things that we can learn from them. My objection is that they're almost too open-minded. They're not like hard science. There's a lot of interpretation and a lot of generalization that can be done. But there are many times there are accurate things. I've read 2 studies recently by sociologists who have commented on this particularly first world problem, the sense of feeling inadequate or not measuring up. They have said, in both cases, a number of factors contribute to this, and it is a bit of a generalization, but 2 factors seem very common in many studies. Number 1, you may be surprised at this, is Facebook. Now, I like Facebook largely because it helps me keep in touch with family or friends around the country. I counted up the other day, I think I have about 20 former students who are Facebook friends, and I can watch how their children are growing and keep in touch with them. So that's the positive things. But they have said, and this is their observation, almost no problems are presented on Facebook. Only successes. So, if you have a problem or are not experiencing the same successes of your Facebook friends, you can begin to think there might be something wrong with me. And amongst a lot of my friends, I have noticed that general trend. Very seldom does anything negative show up on Facebook. And the second thing is contemporary advertising. This can create unrealistic expectations. So, if you don't have this certain item, there must be something wrong with you. Strangely enough, I find this to be a characteristic of many of my friends in some evangelical denominations. There is almost a compulsive need to possess the newest and the latest of an item. And ironically, and sadly, the church can create a problem. There can be a pressure to meet a standard that is sometimes just impossible to achieve. In our reading this morning, there was an example of expected Christian behavior. In Colossians 3 and 12, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and clearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against anyone, forgive as the Lord gave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Now, this is a challenging set of instructions and a very difficult expectation, and almost guaranteed to provide failure at some point. I want to share a little bit about my background. As many of you know, I grew up in the Salvation Army, and again, I have no complaints there. It was just time for a change when we came to the United Church. But it was very interesting how I look back at how we grew up. We had a very public profession of our faith. That was just obligatory. And certainly for those of us who were young people, there was an expectation of good behavior. Uniforms. Talk about public. We were encouraged to wear these at an early age and to a lot of different occasions. And as we didn't have a car and took the bus, I was often seen by my friends wearing my uniform. And they were okay with it, but it did seem to be a little bit of a change to them. Now, in those days, this is almost long ago in a galaxy far, far away, but in those days, all the literature we had this encouraging admonition. If you want to know God's will for you and your life, you are encouraged to approach the next uniformed salvationist you meet. My fervent and frequent prayer was, Lord, please have that person speak to someone else. And 2 or 3 times I was on the bus and somebody came up and I did the best I could and always encouraged them, well, come to our service, and there we are. I think the sad thing, my only regret about growing up, is we were not encouraged to ask or raise any of these concerns. If we did, then we must have been having a spiritual crisis. Sadly, as we got older, many of my friends left to go to other churches or just simply stopped going to church. And while we did a lot of preaching about grace, all too often there was not a demonstration of grace if you questioned too much. Now, one of my favorite books is Bacon Sandwiches and Salvation. Bacon Sandwiches and Salvation, a delightful book. It's a humorous look at many Christian concepts. It defines grace cheekily as prayer said before meals by most Christians when fellow believers are visiting, and by rather fewer when they are not. But we know that grace is far more than that. It is that moment when we are touched by the divine in such a way that our worth and worthiness is confirmed and affirmed. Let me share a personal story of a moment when I received grace, which reaffirmed my worth and worthiness. It was not really a surprise I ended up being part of the United Church, because all throughout my university days I had a wonderful link with them. I was a member of the BC Youth Parliament, which at that time was pretty much run by the United Church, and I knew a number of the ministers there. Our project one year was to run a summer camp for disadvantaged children. I had a number of responsibilities. I was co-leader, counselor, camp chaplain, but most important, kitchen assistant. Now, this sounds like an unimportant task, but this was actually the most crucial and important of my responsibilities, because our camp nearly did not go ahead because we could not find a cook. We finally got one, but we were warned that she had walked out of 2 camps because the kitchen crew did not keep the cooking utensils clean according to her standards. So, my personal responsibility was to keep our cook not only happy, but to the end of the camp. Now, I had another young fellow assigned to work with me who was a nice guy, really nice guy, but he was not overly ambitious. So I ended up doing most of the cleanup. Now, the week went reasonably well until the second to last night. Looking back now, it seems like such a silly incident, but on such trivia, the fate of empires hangs. The cook decided to cook sloppy joes for our kids, and they loved them. Well, that night, the sloppy joes burned and left an incredible mess in all the cooking pans. The cook left the kitchen with these words, "I need those pans absolutely clean by tomorrow's breakfast." My assistant took one look at the mess and said he would like to go to chapel before taking on cleaning this mess. I said, "Go ahead," as I had got somebody else to lead chapel that evening. Well, 3.5 hours later, my assistant did not return. So having cleaned every pan by myself, I was exhausted and really totally fed up. Brene Brown writes in Rising Strong, we need to acknowledge the desperation, the shame, and the vulnerability that comes with failure. Pain and failure must be reckoned and rumbled with until we experience our own revolution in which we come out as stronger, more wholehearted versions of ourselves. Little did I know, I was about to learn this lesson in a very public way. I went up to the lodge where we stayed, and I walked in and found my friend sitting there alone with his feet up, having a smoke, watching TV. Well, I lost it. In a fit of righteous anger, I tore a strip off him for leaving me all the work under which I said were basically false pretenses. He was surprised and startled by my reaction, and I think so was I. Unbeknownst to me, the rest of the staff were in their rooms getting ready for lights out for the campers. They came out to witness my rage and tirade, which now had become very public. As chaplain, as a Christian, I did not demonstrate any of the qualities stated in the reading this morning. My failure, as Brene Brown would call it, my rumble, was very public. As I looked at the shocked faces of my colleagues, I knew I had failed big time. And I felt about this high. At that moment, I learned the truth of the Apostle James' teaching. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. But then in a moment, I will never forget, my friend looked at me and said, "I was wrong. You have every right to be angry with me. I let you down. Please forgive me." Well, just when I thought I could not feel worse, I felt this small. You see, in that moment, I experienced grace, a genuine and sincere forgiveness, an acceptance of me, whatever my behavior, however justified, had been. In Brene Brown's book, I had failed publicly and needed to get over that failure. As I look back at that moment, I probably could have got over this failure personally and resumed my roles and expected behavior in time. But my friends, demonstrating such wonderful grace, just made my return to who I knew I should be that much easier and more complete. Reverend John and Galen frequently remind us that we are Easter people, as a result, people of the book. As Christians, we have experienced God's wonderful, loving, amazing grace. We will on occasion fail, but we will get up and continue because each of us has, at some moment in our lives, been touched by this grace. So, as we move about in our community on a daily basis, we are called to share this grace with others. We know that there are many people in our community who can use it, who know they have failed and need their sense of worthiness restored. So our challenge this week is to take this grace we have received and share it with someone who needs it. You can be sure that God will put such a person in your life to help them rise strong. May God bless you.